All right, hi class. Today we're going to talk about impromptu speaking. So let's first define what impromptu speaking is. It's not speaking with absolutely no time to prepare, but instead it's the ability to quickly organize your thoughts with a short amount of time and then present them in a nice, clear, and convincing pattern for your audience. So in a sense, it's speaking with limited time to prepare. I'm sure that you've done this in lots of situations. For example, in job interviews, you might not know what your new employer is going to ask you, but you kind of prep some interesting facts about yourself and some of your job experience that you're willing to share with your employer. Maybe on a college essay or test question, or even in class when the teacher asks for participation. And then, of course, in our interpersonal communication and daily interactions, we use impromptu speaking all the time. Maybe you come home and your dad asks you, hey, what's up with that dent in the bumper of our car? And you then have to come up with a reasoning right there on the spot. Okay, so impromptu speaking is preparing a speech with very little notice. Sometimes you might do this at a wedding. For example, I wasn't going to speak at my friend's wedding, but when I was there, she asked me if I would say a few words right there on the spot. So I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare. So the first thing that you need to do is define what your speech topic is and what you're going to talk about. So essentially like the main purpose of your speech. So I'm going to give you a speech topic, and then it's up for interpretation. So these are going to be like proverbs, quotes, song lyrics, it could be Bible verses, for example. And then what you're going to do is come up with your own interpretation of that quote or verse. So you're going to choose an area to focus on. Narrow your speech topic. Remember, you're only talking for a few minutes here, so you're just going to sort of narrow that topic and focus on maybe 3 main points. So choose your 3 main points or the big ideas that you want to talk about. Once you have an idea of what you want to talk about, you can start organizing your speech. Okay, so I want you to take a position on the topic. So I'm going to give you a quote. Take a clear position, and the easiest position that you can take is I either agree with this statement or I disagree with this statement, and here are my reasons why. So from that point, you can create a thesis statement or what the point of your speech is, and then you can come up with a preview of your 3 main points. All right, so let's continue on with this step here. I'm going to give an example. So let's say I grab from the bag and my topic is, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So I'm going to say that I actually agree with this topic. And my interpretation of this would be, if you're in a bad situation, try to make the best of it. So here I'm going to come up with my thesis statement, or sort of like my idea of what this means. Sometimes life doesn't always go your way, and so I believe you can try to make the best of every situation. And then I want to give my audience a clear preview and say, I agree with the topic I was given today. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And I'm going to give you examples from my personal life, my professional experience, and examples in pop culture. So now that you have your position, you have your thesis statement, and you have an idea of what your 3 main points are, you want to come up with some support or reasoning for these 3 main points. So decide on your 3 main points. In my quote, I'm going to go with examples from my personal life, examples from my professional experience, and then examples that we may see in pop culture. Be creative here. You do not have to use these 3 main headings as your 3 main points. You can choose anything you want. Maybe you want to talk about how we see this in society, how we see this in politics. So be creative here. You can come up with any 3 main points that you want. It does not have to be the same as my 3 main points. Also, try to add a little bit of variety. So when giving your impromptu speech, in order to be more credible, you don't want to only give personal examples, but maybe try to give examples from the media, examples from your own life, examples from books that you've read, for instance. That way it's not all personal story. All right, so let me give you some examples. The next thing that you want to do is add in subpoints, and these are points that will support your main points that you've come up with. So this could be anything within your existing memory base. So remember, you only have maybe 4 to 5 minutes to prepare your speech, and so anything that you already know can be used in this speech. So personal stories, books that you've read, classes that you've taken, movie examples, theories that you know from classes that you've taken. You can use historical examples. You can use examples from pop culture. Even any random bits of knowledge and information that you've picked up over the years. Like I learned this from my Cub Scout leader, or from my professor, or my mom always used to say this. So anything, any bit of knowledge that you have can be used in this speech. I'm going to give you an example of a speech. Joe, he's a former student, and I want you to watch that speech this week. Now, Joe cites some of his sources. He cites books. He cites Robert Frost. I do not expect you to cite any sources in this speech. That's a more advanced impromptu speech, and it's a 9-minute speech. Yours is only going to be 2 to 3 minutes. If you do have a source that maybe you just read, for example, I was reading an article in the World Health Organization, maybe I want to cite the World Health Organization 2020, but I definitely don't expect you to cite for this speech, although if you want to, you can. All right, so now let's provide some support for our 3 main points. I want you to use at least 2 examples or 1 extended longer example to support each of your main points. And think about spending 45 seconds to a minute in each area of your speech. So I'll give you an example. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. I think this means that if you're in a bad situation, try to make the best of it. So some examples from my personal life. I adopted my dog, Bodie, 3 years ago, and when I went to the Camarillo Animal Shelter to adopt him, I actually was trying to get a small Maltese puppy. And when I showed up there, 20 people showed up for this dog. So they put all of our names in a hat and they chose one name, and it wasn't mine. So that person ended up getting the Maltese puppy. So I thought, well, I guess I'll just walk around the shelter, and if I see a dog that I like, maybe I'll adopt that dog instead. So I ended up seeing this cute little white terrier, and he was in a crate with about 10 other dogs, and he was sort of looking at me with these eyes like, please adopt me. And so I ended up adopting him, and I named him Bodie, and he has been my best friend for the past 3 years, and he's the best dog that I could ask for. We go on hikes together, I take him on family trips with me, and of course he sleeps with me in my bed every night. So the next example that I'm going to give you is my college roommate. So I went to San Diego State University, and I requested to have a single-person dorm. Well, when I got to college, I didn't get that single-person dorm, and instead I was in a dorm room with 7 other girls. So as you could imagine, I was a little upset. I thought, how am I going to study? Everyone's going to be, loud and talking all night. And so I was a little upset. As it turns out, I made good friends with my dorm mates, and we ended up being best friends all through college, and I was a bridesmaid in 2 of their weddings, and today we're still in contact with each other. So these are some examples of how you can sort of make the best out of a bad situation. Another example would be in my professional experience. So before I worked at Moorpark College, I worked at a drug and alcohol treatment center called Sober College. I loved this job. I was there for 7 years. I was an educator teaching public speaking at the treatment center to young adults who were trying to get sober. Unfortunately, the college closed. And so I was really upset about this. But afterwards, I ended up applying to Moorpark College and getting a full-time teaching job at Moorpark College. So as you see, I sort of made the best of a bad situation when it came to my experience at Sober College. And then finally, I'm going to give you an example from pop culture. We all know and love Walt Disney, the founder of Disneyland and Mickey Mouse. But did you know that when Walt Disney was 16 years old, he dropped out of high school to join the Army? As it turns out, the Army found out that he was underage and they didn't allow him to join. So instead, he ended up working, I think, for the Red Cross, and then got interested in animation, and then afterwards, obviously, created the character Mickey Mouse. And so we see we might not have Disney as we know it today if Walt was able to join the military. So these are just some examples of how you can sort of make the best of a bad situation. All right, so when giving us your main points, in between each main point, don't forget those transitions. You want to say something like, now that I've told you a little bit about my personal life, let's move into some examples from my professional experience. Don't forget those signpost words. So you want to use things like first, second, third, next, however, in contrast to, in conclusion. Words that sort of signal that you're changing direction. This is also a good time for you to move your body during your speech or sort of like shift your position to show the audience that you're moving to a new point. It helps guide the listener throughout your entire presentation and says to the listener, okay, I'm moving to a new point now. All right, so now that you have your 3 main points in your body, it sounds counterintuitive, but you're going to go back and write your introduction. So for your introduction, don't forget you need an attention-grabbing statement. So something that pulls your audience in. It could be a different quote than the one that I've given you. It could be a question for your audience or maybe an interesting fact, just something to pull your audience in. The next thing that you want to do is state your topic, your position on the topic, and then give us that thesis and preview of your 3 main points. And finally, you have your body, you have your introduction, you're going to go back and write your conclusion. So restate your thesis and your position on the topic, review those 3 main points one more time, and leave us with a closing device, a motivational thought, a challenge for your audience. Remember, we call this the closing wow statement of your speech. Just something that says, this is the end of my speech. Try to avoid saying, thanks for listening to my speech. Instead, you want to end on a note that we would remember. Okay, so here's the basic structure for your impromptu speech, and you can use a note card for your speech, or you can use a half sheet of paper. So just take a piece of paper and fold it in half. You want to have your introduction with your attention getter, your topic, your thesis, and preview. Then you want to have your body with your 3 main points. Remember, each of these main points needs 1 or 2 examples. Don't forget your links or your transition sentences in between each of your main points. And finally, you want to add your conclusion where you're going to restate your position on the topic, restate your thesis, review your 3 main points, and give us a final closing wow statement. All right, so here is the criteria for your speech. I'm going to ask that you try to speak for 2 to 3 minutes, and I will give you a topic, and once I give you your topic, you will have 4 minutes to prepare your speech. Then remember, you can use a note card or half sheet of paper for this speech. So it's not totally memorized. You can write down a few notes on there. I would suggest writing down your 3 main points and maybe a bullet or 2 for each of your stories or examples that go along with that. I do want you to head to Canvas before your speech day and watch the impromptu speech. I have an example there. Joe is from our speech and debate team, and he gives a really great impromptu speech. Now remember, his speech is going to be a lot longer than yours, so you don't have to give a 7 to 9 minute speech. You only have to give a 2 to 3 minute speech. But I think it's a really good example of how to format the impromptu speech. Also, you want to pay attention to Joe's body language and enthusiasm throughout his speech. Next, review the impromptu speech rubric. So the impromptu speech rubric is a little bit different than the regular speech evaluation form that I use. I use a different form because it's easier for me to check boxes off during this speech because it's a much shorter speech, and it's hard for me to write a lot during this one. So I have posted the impromptu speech grading rubric online, so you can sort of view it there. It's very similar to our original evaluation form.